So the topic I chose to examine for the stasis interrogation was actually the Bears Ears National Monument. This one is interesting. It's a little bit different from some of the other articles that people examined. Definitely a very different topic. So what we're going to be examining is whose land is it and how is it tied to social class. So here we see a map. This is the Bears Ears region. Bears Ears is a national monument in southern Utah. And on the left, we see Bears Ears as it was designated in 2016 by President Barack Obama. So that's the boundaries that he proposed, and those are 1.35 million acres. On the right, we see the boundaries that President Trump changed those boundaries to in 2017, and that is 228,784 acres. So it's an 85% reduction in size. And now we're going to ask, so what? What's the problem? Why is this an issue? Why should we care? Why is it tied to social class? And we're going to examine that real quick. What I decided, and these are pretty generalized categories. If you examined closer, you would definitely find more specific categories. But what I broke it down into was three different social classes. One is consistent of mostly Native Americans who support the monument to restore or expand boundaries, and that's based on their cultural and religious beliefs. Another group is preservationists, a different class of people, usually a higher class, and they also are in favor of restoring the boundaries. However, that's mainly for science and recreation purposes. The third, typically a lower middle to lower class people, is agriculturists, and they would like to keep the monument as small as possible, if not gone altogether. So you're going to look at some facts real quick. Westward expansion is the big driving force that led to pushing Native Americans off of their own land. In 1906, the Antiquities Act was passed, which gave the President of the United States power to designate land, federal land, as national monument without is key, without the approval of Congress. So then we see this Bears Ears era open up in 1996 when Bill Clinton set aside 1.9 million acres, that's almost 2 million acres of southern Utah land, as the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And now we don't examine Grand Staircases closely, however, it is tied to Bears Ears fairly closely. Grand Staircase did not sit well with locals, many of whom were agriculturists, as we discussed before. So the monument brought tourism, but with tourism it brought a different class of people, preservationists. So these are those recreationists and scientists, many of whom don't fit in with these local, more conservative agriculturists who had been there for years. These preservationists are scientists, recreational users, and after 20 years now, so it's been 22 years since this happened, after 20 years, life was beginning to finally adjust, and locals were once again blindsided by the federal government. So here we see Bears Ears introduced. In December of 2016, Barack Obama designated 1.35 million more acres of southern Utah. I know this is close. It's not attached to, but it's close to Bears Ears. To Grand Staircase. So the native tribes in the region, there's 5 major tribes. They had been working with the president for several years, and they originally proposed a 1.9 million acre monument in addition to Grand Staircase. So keep in mind, Grand Staircase is already 1.9 million acres, and they're proposing another 1.9 million acre monument. So finally, in 2016, 1.35 million acres was rewarded to them. They took it as a victory, and Bears Ears was considered the first native national monument. Until 2016, the Antiquities Act had never been used expressly to address the concerns of native peoples. So then we see here the exit of the great 1.35 million acre Bears Ears National Monument. Shortly after its designation, Donald Trump took the office of President of the United States. Celebration of Bears Ears turned to planning how to protect it rather than celebrating its existence. So locals in southern Utah and their representatives were heard by Trump, and Bears Ears was slashed by 85% just 1 year after it was designated. So then we see some retaliation. Immediately after the monument was shrunk, although there was celebration from locals and agriculturists who did not support the monument, the retaliation from the shrinking, and note that Grand Staircase was also shrunk. Again, we don't focus on Grand Staircase in this situation, and that's mainly because it's not a native national monument. Bears Ears is really native national monument. So the outdoor company Patagonia and the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, so that's the 5 tribes in southern Utah, filed lawsuits that were designated to question the legality of this reduction of the monument. They claim that the president has power to set aside land but not to take it away as national monument. To this day, no verdict has been reached, so that's kind of the kicker, is that there's no verdict yet. So now we have to define some of the problem. This is the problem. In essence, the Bears Ears debate is a collision of cultures. That's those social classes. It's an old ideology versus a new ideology. It's an ideology of worship versus study versus utilization. And overall, it's an examination of who is right and who is wrong. Are all 3 parties right? Are all 3 parties wrong? And how can you tell who is more right and who should be listened to more than the next party? It's the importance of this monument. You may be wondering, to you as someone who might not be directly involved, what is the importance? And directly, the most important involvement is that this could severely impact the Utah economy in the coming years. If Bears Ears is restored to its full size, agriculture and mining industry in southern Utah could plummet. That would affect the economy in some ways, but we would also see a spike in tourism. So that's why it's important for everybody to understand. However, on the emotional side of things, this big debate, is it really that important? If we look, in a 20-year point of view, it's not as important as we make it seem right now. That brings us to the action plan. And my action plan, as well as the action plan of the article that I read, that was Battle Over the American West by Hannah Nordhaus. It's a National Geographic article. And so we both took the stance of being patient. So the conflict between each of these 3 classes is deeply rooted in emotion being the key. In order to accommodate each party, there will need to be patience. So my plan, my strategy, was to set the problem before Supreme Court and then let them make a decision. Whether or not the court restores the boundaries, support is key and patience is even more key. Time will best heal the wounds. Likely, the result of this all will not be in favor of one party or the next. It's going to be kind of a compromise. Everyone's going to lose something. That brings us to the response. A lot of people disagree with me in that sense. They think that one party should be right and the next should be wrong, or maybe 2 parties should be right and one should be wrong. However, coming to a compromise is the hard part here. And we see that in the willingness of both the natives and Patagonia, who represents preservationists, to sue the president over this change. That really shows us how dedicated they are to their cause. All in all, it kind of comes down to a matter of, like I said before, patience. We see other disputes in the past, such as the Grand Canyon, that was not supported at all at first, but eventually, a couple generations later, it became supported. Emotions are the driving force behind the debate right now, and with time those will subside. In 3 generations, no one's really going to care as much as they do right now. And that's the really big point that has to be carried through.